The arrival. Mei Lin stood at the edge of the dusty country road, her suitcase balanced awkwardly in one hand, the other shielding her eyes from the late afternoon sun. The gentle sway of wheat fields in the distance reminded her of the quiet farm she had grown up near, yet this place felt unfamiliar, strange, and inviting all at once. The town she had left behind had never fully accepted her. Whispers had followed her for as long as she could remember. She's different, not like us. Her last potential suitor had withdrawn his proposal after his parents voiced objections she barely understood, citing reasons she could not change. Mei had carried the sting of rejection silently, her heart quietly retreating from a world that refused to see her worth. She stepped onto the gravel driveway leading to the ranch she had been hired to work at, her boots crunching softly. The air smelled of hay, sun-baked soil, and the faint, comforting scent of horses. A low fence enclosed the property, and in the distance, a sturdy cabin stood beside a larger farmhouse. It was simple and functional, but to Mei, it radiated a sense of refuge she had almost forgotten existed. Daniel Hayes emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a worn rag. His broad shoulders and deliberate movements spoke of someone accustomed to labor, someone who carried responsibility as naturally as breathing. His eyes, a steady shade of green, scanned her with polite curiosity, careful not to betray judgment. He had noticed her arrival from the corner of the barn, sensing immediately that she was not from around here, that she carried her own quiet burden. Behind him, a small figure peeked from the farmhouse doorway. Emma Hayes, barely 7, clutched a worn doll to her chest. Her wide brown eyes were wary, studying the stranger with equal parts curiosity and caution. Daniel caught her gaze and offered a reassuring nod before turning back to Mei. "Welcome," he said, his voice calm and deliberate. "I'm Daniel. You must be Mei. I hear you're here to help at the ranch." Mei hesitated for a heartbeat, then smiled faintly. "Yes. Thank you for having me." Her accent lingered softly, shaping her words like a delicate brushstroke on the air. "I'm happy to work." Daniel's gaze softened slightly, sensing the careful reserve in her tone. "We'll start simple. You can stay in the guest cabin for now. It's modest, but it'll be a roof over your head." The offer startled her more than she expected. It was rare for someone to extend trust without conditions, to treat her as more than a burden or a curiosity. Mei felt a flutter of hope, fragile and unfamiliar. She nodded, unable to find words adequate for the gratitude swelling inside her. As she followed Daniel toward the cabin, she stole glimpses of the ranch. Horses grazing under the sun, the gentle sway of wind through the wheat, and the simple, grounded life that seemed almost untouched by the harsh judgments of her past. Each step toward this new place felt like stepping away from the shadow of old prejudices, yet her heart remained guarded. She had learned that safety was often fleeting and acceptance rarer still. Inside the cabin, Mei placed her suitcase on the wooden floor and looked around. The space was modest but clean, with a small bed against one wall, a table by the window, and shelves lined with neatly folded linens. A faint scent of pine and sun-warmed wood lingered in the air. It was the kind of place where one could breathe, where life moved with quiet steadiness. Daniel lingered at the door. "Dinner's at 6. Emma's excited to meet you properly. She's curious." His words carried a subtle warning. She must tread carefully with the little girl's fragile trust. Mei nodded, feeling a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. "I'll do my best," she replied softly. As Daniel left, she walked to the small window and looked out over the fields, the sun casting long golden shadows across the land. In that moment, she allowed herself a tentative hope that maybe in this quiet corner of the world she could belong. That maybe for the first time in her life, she could find a place that welcomed her not despite who she was, but for it. The faint sound of Emma's footsteps outside reminded her that connection was already beginning, however slowly. Mei exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Life, she realized, had offered her a second chance, a chance to heal, to grow, to find the kind of acceptance she had never known. And though she did not yet understand how this new chapter would unfold, she felt the first spark of courage to meet it head-on. The sun dipped lower behind the hills, painting the sky in streaks of amber and rose. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied, and the rhythm of ranch life continued undisturbed. Mei Lin closed her eyes for a moment, listening, and knew she was ready to step into whatever this new life might bring. Settling in, morning arrived slowly at the Hayes Ranch, the first rays of sunlight spilling over the rolling fields, casting golden light across the dew-kissed grass. Mei Lin stirred in the small guest cabin, pulling on a worn sweater and tying her hair back with a loose ribbon. The quiet of the morning was broken only by the soft creak of the cabin door and the distant sounds of horses shifting in their stalls. She had learned quickly that life here required early hours and steady hands, but there was comfort in the routine. Work grounded her, made her feel useful, something she had rarely experienced in the world she had left behind. Stepping outside, she was greeted by the sight of Daniel, already tending to the horses, his movements precise and unhurried. Emma hovered near him, small hands clutching the fence post as she watched her father at work. Mei paused, observing the dynamics silently. The bond between father and daughter was strong, resilient, yet tender in its quiet moments. She realized that, like her, they had both known loss and disappointment, though in different forms. Daniel's grief over his wife's departure was palpable, even the way he moved, careful not to burden his daughter with too much of his pain. And Emma's cautious curiosity reminded Mei of her own childhood, a cautious approach to trust shaped by disappointment and whispered judgments. "Good morning," Mei called softly, her voice carrying over the field. Daniel glanced up, offering a nod of acknowledgement, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Emma waved timidly, her small face brightening at the recognition. "Morning," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "Breakfast is on the table when you're ready. After that, there's hay to be moved and fences to check." His tone was neutral but carried an undertone of expectation. This was a place where work mattered, and he would expect no less from anyone under his roof. Mei nodded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and determination. She had never shied away from labor, yet the responsibility of working alongside people who were unfamiliar with her, people who could easily judge or misinterpret her actions, added weight to every step. She moved toward the cabin's small kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast for herself before venturing into the day's work. Hours passed in a rhythm of labor and quiet observation. Mei fed the animals, repaired a broken fence, and moved bales of hay under Daniel's watchful gaze. Each task, though physically demanding, offered a sense of accomplishment that she had long been denied. Emma occasionally assisted, her small hands fumbling but determined, and Mei found herself smiling more freely than she had in months. The child's presence was a bridge, a way to connect without words, a reminder that trust and affection could be nurtured gradually. By midday, Daniel approached her, carrying a bucket of feed. His eyes, though careful and reserved, held a flicker of appreciation. "You're faster than I expected," he said, setting the bucket down beside her. "And careful. That counts for a lot around here." Mei inclined her head, cheeks warming at the compliment. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I like working. It helps me feel grounded." The words slipped out hesitantly, revealing a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. Daniel's gaze softened, recognizing the honesty behind them. Lunch passed in companionable silence, punctuated only by Emma's occasional chatter about a calf or a game she had imagined with the chickens. Daniel listened with patience, smiling when appropriate but careful not to overshadow Mei's growing presence. In small, deliberate ways, the rhythm of daily life began to bridge the distance between them. Trust was forming, cautious but undeniable, built on shared labor and quiet recognition. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, Mei paused to rest, leaning against the weathered fence. She looked at the expanse of the ranch, the horses grazing, Emma laughing softly at a playful nudge from Daniel, and felt a warmth she had not expected. Here, she was neither judged nor dismissed. Here, her efforts mattered, her presence valued. Yet beneath the comfort, a flicker of doubt remained, a fear that, like before, acceptance could be fleeting. Daniel approached, setting a hand lightly on the fence post near her. "You're settling in well," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of observation and approval. "Emma likes having you around, and so do I." There was no exaggeration, no overstatement, just truth quietly offered. Mei turned to meet his gaze, a tentative smile touching her lips. For the first time in months, she felt the fragile stirrings of hope. Perhaps in this quiet corner of the world, she could belong. Perhaps the fractures of the past did not have to define her future. The day ended with the sun dipping behind the hills, painting the sky in streaks of amber and rose. As Mei prepared for dinner, she reflected on the small victories of the day. Laughter shared, tasks accomplished, trust slowly building. And she realized, with a quiet certainty, that this was only the beginning of hard work, of connection, and perhaps of a life she had long imagined but never dared to claim. Shadows of the past. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of hay and earth as Mei Lin carried buckets to the stables. The rhythmic clink of metal and the soft shuffle of hooves created a familiar cadence she had grown to appreciate. Yet beneath the calm routine, a subtle unease had settled in her chest, a sensation she had felt before in her life, whenever past judgments threatened to intrude on new beginnings. Daniel moved ahead of her, checking fence lines and calling out instructions to Emma as she trailed behind, helping where she could. His attention was split between maintaining the ranch and quietly observing Mei's work. He had grown accustomed to her presence, appreciating her diligence, her quiet competence, and the way she seemed to blend seamlessly into the rhythms of the ranch. And yet, a residual wariness lingered. He knew trust was delicate, and he had been burned before. The uneasy tension was abruptly intensified when the rumble of an approaching car echoed down the driveway. Mei glanced up and saw the familiar flash of Laura's car. Sleek, deliberate, a presence that had once shattered the fragile equilibrium of Daniel's life. She instinctively stiffened, the memory of betrayal surfacing unbidden. Daniel's jaw tightened as he watched the car slow near the barn. Laura stepped out, her movements deliberate, her gaze sweeping over the ranch before landing on Daniel. "I thought I'd drop by," she said, her voice casual but edged with a confidence that carried unspoken expectations. "I wanted to see Emma and perhaps catch up with you." Emma froze, clutching her doll tightly. Mei felt a pang of protective concern for the child, sensing the disruption this woman could bring. Daniel's posture stiffened, his eyes narrowing slightly. He had spent years shielding Emma from this exact kind of intrusion, the kind that blurred lines, reopened old wounds, and threatened to undermine the fragile stability they had rebuilt. Laura's gaze shifted toward Mei, lingering just long enough to communicate judgment. "And you are?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. The question was rhetorical, a challenge disguised as curiosity. Mei's fingers tightened around the bucket handle, a reflexive shield against the subtle hostility. "I'm Mei Lin," she replied, voice steady though her heart raced. "I help out around the ranch." Laura's eyes flickered with a mixture of amusement and disdain, as if to say this woman did not belong, as if her very presence was an intrusion. Mei felt the familiar sting of being judged for reasons beyond her control, and a flicker of doubt crept into her mind. Had she misread the safety of this place? Was this fragile acceptance merely temporary? Daniel intervened smoothly, his voice calm but firm. "Mei is part of our lives here. She's helping with the ranch and with Emma. I'd appreciate it if you respected that." His words carried weight, authority, and a subtle warning. Boundaries had been drawn. Laura's smile was brief, almost imperceptible, before she shifted the focus back to Daniel. "I just thought Emma might enjoy some time with me. That's all," she said, though the tension beneath the surface contradicted her words. Daniel's expression did not soften. He had learned, painfully, that Laura's casual statements often masked selfish motives. For the rest of the morning, an invisible tension hung over the ranch. Mei tried to keep busy, moving between tasks with careful attention, but every glance from Laura felt scrutinizing, as if she were evaluating not just Mei's work, but her right to exist in this space. Emma, caught between loyalty to her father and curiosity about her mother, clung closer to Daniel, eyes darting nervously between the adults. By midday, Laura had made her presence known enough to unsettle Mei, whose confidence wavered under the weight of judgment. She paused at the edge of the barn, bucket in hand, contemplating whether to retreat to the safety of her cabin. Her mind raced with memories of exclusion, whispers, and the feeling of being unwanted. Daniel approached quietly, placing a reassuring hand near hers, not touching, but close enough to convey protection. "Don't let her words shake you," he said, voice low and steady. "You're part of this family now. You belong here, and I won't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Mei's chest eased slightly at his words. For the first time in weeks, she felt the certainty that someone truly saw her worth, not despite her background or past, but because of her presence, her efforts, and the quiet strength she had carried all along. That evening, after Laura left with a promise to visit again soon, Mei sat on the cabin porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The golden light softened the tension of the day, illuminating the ranch and the steady life it promised. Emma's small voice called her for dinner, and Mei rose with a renewed sense of purpose. Those shadows of the past had intruded. The bond she shared with Daniel and Emma had deepened. The day had tested her, forced her to confront fear and doubt, but it had also reaffirmed a growing certainty. This place, these people, offered a chance for trust, acceptance, and perhaps something more. As the night settled over the ranch, Mei closed the cabin door behind her and exhaled. The world outside might still carry judgment, and old wounds might resurface, but she had chosen to stand her ground. And in doing so, she realized that belonging was not something given. It was something she could claim, one quiet, deliberate step at a time. A place to belong. The morning light spilled over the hills, soft and golden, painting the ranch in warmth that seemed to whisper of new beginnings. Mei Lin stepped onto the porch of the guest cabin, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of hay and pine, but the tension from recent days, the intrusion of past ghosts, had begun to dissolve. She could hear Emma's laughter from the yard, a clear, unburdened sound that felt like a small triumph. Daniel emerged from the barn, brushing his hands on a rag, his movements deliberate and calm. There was a quiet certainty in the way he carried himself today, a contrast to the guarded caution he had shown when Mei first arrived. He walked toward her, boots crunching softly against the gravel path, and paused beside the railing. Neither spoke immediately. Sometimes words were unnecessary. The shared rhythm of the ranch, the familiarity of labor, and the presence of Emma had already built a foundation stronger than any spoken promise. "Morning," Daniel said at last, his voice steady, almost gentle. "Emma's already chasing the chickens. She seems happier than usual." Mei smiled softly, sipping her tea. "She's wonderful," she replied, eyes following the child as she darted between the barn and the fence, giggling. "You've raised her well." Daniel's gaze lingered on her for a moment, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them. "I've raised her alone," he said, a hint of weight in his voice. "But you've helped more than you know. You've made this house feel like a home again." Her heart stirred at his words, a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun. For weeks, she had feared rejection, feared that her presence here was temporary or conditional. Now, she felt the fragile but undeniable certainty that she belonged, not just in the cabin, not just on the ranch, but within this small, quiet family. The day passed in the rhythm of chores and conversation, a gentle interplay of labor and laughter. Mei repaired a fence while Daniel tended to a stubborn calf, and Emma supervised with keen attention, offering advice and running off occasionally to check on the chickens. Small moments of connection, the passing of a tool, a shared laugh, the brush of hands while carrying a bale of hay, carried more weight than words could convey. They were building trust, not through declarations, but through consistency and care. Later, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Daniel led Mei on a walk around the ranch, the hills stretching endlessly before them. The lights softened everything, casting long shadows that intertwined with their steps. Daniel spoke then, breaking the silence. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice low but steady. "Laura, she's not coming back into our lives. Whatever part of me that cared for her, it's gone. I see now that she left a void I didn't know how to fill, and I almost forgot how it felt to trust someone completely." Mei looked at him, understanding without needing to speak. She had lived her own share of exclusion, of feeling judged and abandoned for reasons beyond her control. "I understand," she said softly. "I feared being unwanted all my life. But I see now that maybe belonging is something I can claim, too." Daniel stopped, turning to face her, the wind gently stirring her hair. "You already have," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of truth and choice. "Emma sees it. I see it. And I want you to stay. Not just for the work you do, but because you're part of this family. Because you've become someone I want to share life with." May's eyes filled with quiet tears, but she smiled, the tension of doubt finally easing. For the first time, she felt fully seen, fully accepted, not as an outsider judged for her past or heritage, but as someone valued for her presence, her heart, and her steadfast courage. They returned to the cabin, where Emma ran to meet them, chattering about the day's adventures. Daniel ruffled her hair gently, glancing at Mei with a mixture of affection and relief. Mei knelt to meet Emma at eye level, and the child threw her arms around her in a spontaneous hug. It was a small, perfect affirmation that this was a place of belonging, a place where trust and love had room to grow. As twilight settled over the ranch, Mei and Daniel stood side by side on the porch, the sky painted in streaks of amber and rose. In that quiet moment, neither spoke, but the silence was full of understanding. The shadows of the past had receded, replaced by a promise of shared mornings, steady work, and evenings filled with warmth. And in the fading light, Mei Lin realized that for the first time in her life, she was home.